Imagine an entire people gone, not because of famine, not because of war, but because of one single betrayal. What if a trusted friend, an ally, or even a family member made a choice so devastating it erased a whole Native American tribe from history? Tonight, we uncovered that story and the hidden wisdom it left behind. When most people pictured Native Americans, they imagined tipis, feathers, and warriors on horseback. But that's just a fragment of the truth. The tribes of North America were not only warriors, they were engineers, philosophers, healers, and storytellers. Their lives were woven into the land in ways we can barely imagine today. Yet history has been cruel. Entire tribes have vanished from the earth, leaving behind only whispers in the wind. Some were lost to disease, others to war. But sometimes, the end came not from outside enemies, but from within. This is not a story about nameless people in dusty books. It's a story of survival, family, trust, and betrayal. It's about how a single choice, one act of treachery can burn down centuries of tradition in a single moment. And along the way, we'll uncover secrets about Native survival skills, spiritual beliefs, and daily lives. Secrets that might make you wonder, were they more advanced in wisdom than we are today? Stay with me, because by the end, you'll see how their story holds lessons for our modern world. And you might ask yourself, if betrayal could destroy them, what could it do to us? When you think of Native American survival, maybe you imagine simple shelters or rough handmade clothes. But the truth is far more impressive. What many people call primitive was actually the result of generations of experimentation, knowledge sharing, and adaptation to the harshest environments on Earth. Take the tipi, for example. To outsiders, it looked like just a cone-shaped tent, but in reality, it was a masterpiece of engineering. Designed with poles that locked together like the bones of a giant animal. Covered with buffalo hides thicker than any winter coat you've ever worn, the tipi could withstand brutal winds, icy snow, and even the scorching heat of the Great Plains. A flap at the top acted as a chimney, letting smoke out, but keeping warmth in. It was portable, quick to assemble, and strong enough to last through the seasons. In today's language, you could call it the ultimate survival RV, but it wasn't just about the tipi. Tribes living in other regions developed their own homes based on their environment. The Iroquois built longhouses, massive wooden halls that could hold several families under one roof, with shared fires and communal spaces. The Pueblo people of the Southwest carved entire villages into stone cliffs, turning the earth itself into fortress-like homes. The Inuit of the far north shaped snow into igloos, using nothing but frozen water to survive in temperatures that would kill most of us in hours. Each shelter was a scientific response to the land. Every tribe carried centuries of data not on paper, but in memory, passed down through elders. Think about it. Could you design a house that keeps you warm without electricity, cool without air conditioning, and safe without locks or metal? They could. Now let's talk clothing. Forget the Hollywood image of feathered headdresses and painted faces. Day-to-day life was about function and survival. On the plains, buffalo hides became warm robes and moccasins that outlasted many modern shoes. In forest regions, deer and elk skins were softened into buckskin clothing, tough but flexible. Tribes in the Southwest wove cotton into breezy garments suited for desert heat. And these weren't just practical. They were works of art. Beads, quills, and dyes transformed clothing into symbols of identity, status, and spiritual meaning. Every stitch told a story. Every pattern connected the wearer to their people and their ancestors. The tools were just as ingenious. Stone arrowheads were shaped with such precision that archaeologists today still marvel at them. Spears, bows, and knives weren't just weapons, they were lifelines. Bone needles stitched hides together. Shells became ornaments and trade items. Even fire was engineered, with flint, bow drills, and tinder carefully prepared. They could start flames in conditions where most modern campers would give up. What's fascinating is how little waste existed in their world. The buffalo, for example, was more than food. Its hide became clothing and shelter. Its bones turned into tools and weapons. Its sinew was string for bows. Its stomach became water containers. Nothing was wasted. Compare that to today, when we throw away mountains of plastic after a single use. Who's really more advanced in terms of survival wisdom? But here's the deeper truth. Survival was not just about tools or shelters. It was about trust. A tipi only stood because families worked together. A longhouse only stayed warm because many hands kept the fires burning. Tools only existed because skills were shared across generations. Survival was not a solo mission, it was a community effort, and that is where betrayal becomes deadly. Because what happens when someone inside the circle breaks that trust? What happens when a tool is stolen, a secret is sold, or an ally chooses greed over loyalty? As we'll see, one betrayal could undo all of it. If you walked into a Native American village centuries ago, what would you see? Not chaos, not random wandering. You would see rhythm, a rhythm tied to the sun, the seasons, and the heartbeat of the earth. At sunrise, smoke would curl up from cooking fires. Children would tumble out of shelters, chasing each other with laughter. Elders would sit nearby, watching closely, always ready to teach a lesson hidden in a story. Women prepared food, tanned hides, or worked bead by bead on intricate clothing. Men might be repairing weapons, setting traps, or planning the hunt. Everyone had a role. Everyone belonged. Meals weren't just about eating. They were about gratitude. Before buffalo meat, corn, beans, or squash touched the lips, thanks was given to the animals, the earth, and the spirits. To modern eyes, it may look like ritual. To them, it was survival, because forgetting gratitude meant forgetting connection. And forgetting connection meant disrespecting the very forces that gave life. The family unit was strong, but it wasn't always the way we think of families today. In many tribes, children didn't belong only to their parents, they belonged to the whole community. If your father was away hunting or your mother was weaving, you might be fed by an aunt, carried by a grandmother, or taught by an uncle. Imagine a childhood where dozens of hands held you safe. And then came the rituals. Some were daily, some were seasonal, some marked life's great passages. When a boy became a man, he might go on a vision quest alone in the wilderness, fasting, seeking a dream that would reveal his spirit guide. When a girl became a woman, ceremonies of song and dance celebrated her role as the future lifeblood of the tribe. The drumbeat was constant, not just music, not just entertainment. The drum was the pulse of the universe, said to echo the heartbeat of Mother Earth herself. When the drum sounded, people didn't just hear it, they felt it in their bones. And when voices lifted in song, they weren't singing for fame or applause. They were calling to the spirits, to the ancestors, to the forces that lived in every river, tree, and star. Daily life was also marked by storytelling. At night, when fires glowed against the dark, the elders became the tribe's living library. Through myths and tales, children learned courage, wisdom, and caution. Trickster figures taught not to be greedy. Animal spirits showed the importance of respect. Heroes revealed that bravery was not about strength, but about sacrifice. It's easy to imagine these stories as entertainment, but they were survival guides in disguise. A tale about a trickster stealing food wasn't just funny, it warned children not to hoard. A myth about a hunter who ignored the spirits wasn't just spooky, reminded the tribe that arrogance toward nature could mean death. And here's something we often miss. These daily rituals weren't superstitions. They were codes of balance, ethics, and resilience. They shaped every decision. They gave meaning to hardship. They created unity. But unity has a price. When everyone's life is woven into the same pattern, what happens when one thread snaps? What happens when one person someone trusted, someone close chooses selfishness instead of harmony? Imagine sitting by the fire, hearing stories about loyalty, about the sacred bond of family, about the ancestors who watch every action. And then imagine discovering that someone you trusted most has broken that bond. That's when the fire becomes dangerous. That's when stories become weapons. And that's when betrayal begins to spread, not just through words, but through fear. In the next chapter, we'll step into the world of weapons and warfare, because while native life was full of beauty, ritual, and community, it was also a world where betrayal could turn brother against brother, and the results were deadly. When most people picture Native American warfare, they imagine bows, arrows, and ambushes from the forest. But the reality was far more complex and far more human. Weapons were not just tools of destruction. They were extensions of survival. A bow was not simply a weapon of war. It was a lifeline for feeding the village. A spear was not just for battle. It was also for fishing and hunting. Even the club, carved from hardwood or stone, carried more than brute force. It carried the weight of tradition, the skill of the maker, and the responsibility of the warrior. But make no mistake, when war came, these weapons could unleash chaos. A single arrow, fletched with eagle feathers, could travel silently through the air and end a life before the enemy even saw it. A tomahawk, balanced to perfection, could be thrown or wielded hand to hand with terrifying precision. The war club, decorated with carvings and sometimes inlaid with bone, struck fear not only in the flesh but in the spirit. Battles were often small by modern standards, raids, skirmishes, and ambushes rather than massive armies, but the emotions behind them were enormous. Honor, survival, revenge, and sometimes desperation. A raid might mean stealing horses, rescuing captives, or sending a message to rivals. But behind every battle was something deeper, the balance of survival between tribes. Warriors prepared not just with weapons, but with rituals. Paint was applied in sacred patterns to give protection. Feathers symbolized achievements and courage. Before battle, warriors might pray, fast, or seek visions. To outsiders, this may seem like superstition. To the people, it was armor for the soul. Because war wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. And here's where betrayal becomes deadly. Imagine sharing weapons with a trusted ally, only to see those same weapons turned against your people. Imagine teaching another tribe your tactics for hunting and then watching them use those tactics to raid your camp. Knowledge itself was power, and once shared, it could never be taken back. Some betrayals came in the heat of battle. Scouts leading enemies to hidden camps, allies abandoning agreements mid-fight. Others came in silence, trading secrets, selling information, or even revealing weaknesses of defenses. A single whispered word to the wrong person could mean death for dozens. And perhaps the cruelest betrayal of all, turning family into enemies. History remembers countless times when intertribal alliances were broken, not by foreign invaders, but by rival clans seeking advantage. Brothers who once hunted together could find themselves facing each other across the battlefield, their arrows aimed not at strangers, but at kin. Think about it, what is more terrifying? Facing an unknown enemy, or realizing that the hand pulling the bowstring across from you once held yours as a child? Weapons carried honor, but betrayal poisoned that honor. And once trust was shattered, every arrow, every tomahawk, every club became heavier. Not because of their weight, but because of the guilt, the fear, and the loss of what once was. Still, warfare was not constant. It was balanced with peace, with diplomacy, with ceremonies to heal old wounds. But betrayal was like a scar, it never fully faded. And when it returned, it burned hotter than before. In the next chapter, we'll step away from the battlefield and into the natural world itself. Because the tribes didn't just fight with weapons. They fought with wisdom, drawn from the animals and the land around them. But even their betrayal lurked. When someone broke the sacred bond with nature, the price was often heavier than any enemy attack. For native peoples, the land wasn't just scenery. It was alive. Every river, every mountain, every animal carried meaning. To survive meant more than knowing how to hunt or gather, meant understanding the spirit inside everything around you. Take the eagle. Its feathers weren't just decorations. They were sacred gifts, representing vision, strength, and connection to the sky. Warriors wore them not for fashion, but for courage, for clarity, for honor. When an eagle soared overhead, it wasn't just a bird in flight, it was a messenger, carrying prayers to the Creator. Or the buffalo. To the tribes of the plains, the buffalo was life itself. Food, clothing, shelter, tools, nearly everything came from this single animal. To betray the buffalo, to hunt recklessly, to waste its gifts, that wasn't just foolish. It was sacrilege. It meant turning your back on the very heartbeat of survival. Wolves, too, carried deep meaning. They were teachers of loyalty, family, and cooperation. Watch a wolf pack, and you learn about leadership, about unity, about protecting the weakest. Many tribes told stories of ancestors guided by wolves, taught how to hunt, taught how to move silently through the forest. Even the bear, feared for its strength, was honored as a healer. Its knowledge of roots and herbs inspired medicine practices. Its ferocity taught courage. To face a bear in battle was rare, but to betray the teachings of the bear spirit was unthinkable. Nature was not just resource, it was relationship, and relationships depend on trust. A hunter who wasted food, a warrior who killed for pride, or a leader who ignored spiritual guidance, they were betraying more than tradition. They were betraying the balance that kept the people alive. Consider this. When a young hunter killed his first deer, he was taught to thank the spirit of that animal. If he didn't, he mocked it, wasted it, or bragged about it, that act could ripple out like a crack in the ice. Elders warned that the spirits would notice, that future hunts would fail, that sickness would follow. Whether you believe in spirits or not, the message was clear. Respect sustains life. Disrespect destroys it. Now imagine betrayal, not just from one hunter, but from a whole tribe. Imagine breaking a treaty with the land, taking more than was given, hunting buffalo not for need but for greed. The balance would collapse. Starvation would follow. And worst of all, the trust between tribes could shatter. Because here's the truth. Survival wasn't only about weapons and shelters. It was about alliances with people and with nature. When you broke faith with either, the consequences were devastating. This wasn't just myth. History tells us that when overhunting began, often encouraged by trade with outsiders, tribes faced famine. When sacred places were defiled, when rivers were poisoned, or forests overcut, the ripple effects tore through communities like fire. And always, the word spread. Someone betrayed the old ways. But what happens when betrayal comes not just from greed, but from fear? What if someone, desperate to survive, made a deal with outsiders, offering land, animals, or sacred knowledge in exchange for guns or food? Could a single choice, born of desperation, lead to the destruction of an entire people? That's the question we now face. Because when betrayal involved not just animals or land, but spiritual beliefs themselves, the tribe's very soul was at risk. And that is where we turn next, into the heart of native spirituality, where myths, spirits, and visions guided every decision. A betrayal here was not just deadly, it was eternal to the tribes of North America. The world was not divided between the sacred and the ordinary. Everything was sacred. Every step on the earth, every breath of wind, every flicker of firelight carried spiritual meaning. Spirituality was not a separate part of life, it was life. When a hunter entered the forest, he prayed, When a mother gave birth, she sang to the ancestors. When warriors went into battle, they painted their faces with sacred colors that connected them to unseen powers. The universe, in their eyes, was alive with spirits. Some were kind, some were dangerous, all were powerful. The Great Spirit, the Creator, was the source of all life. Beneath that presence were countless beings, animal guides, trickster figures, ancestors, elemental forces of wind, fire, water, and stone. And myths were not just stories, they were roadmaps. They explained why the world was the way it was, and how to survive within it. The coyote, the trickster, might fool others with lies and schemes. His tales warned, greed and arrogance lead to downfall. The eagle, soaring high, taught vision and courage. The spider, weaving her web, taught patience and creation. But here is where betrayal takes on a terrifying form. What happens when someone within the tribe breaks faith with the spirits themselves? Imagine this, a leader ignoring a vision quest, choosing power over wisdom. A warrior refusing to honor the animal he killed, taking pride where there should be humility. Or worse, someone revealing sacred songs or rituals to outsiders, trading away the lifeblood of the people for a few scraps of wealth. In native traditions, this wasn't just disrespect. It was dangerous, because the spirits were not distant gods, they were present forces. Betraying them meant inviting imbalance, inviting disaster, a bad hunt, a broken alliance. A sickness sweeping through the camp hall could be seen as punishment for betrayal, and history is full of whispers about just that. A shaman who used his gifts for selfish gain, a chief who ignored the warnings of dreams, a scout who guided enemies to sacred land. Again and again, betrayal of the spiritual order was followed by collapse in the physical world. But why? From one angle, it may seem like superstition, yet look closer. Spiritual codes were not random, they were survival strategies encoded in story. Respect the buffalo. That meant don't overhunt. Honor the river. That meant keep the water pure. Listen to dreams. That meant pay attention to intuition, to signs in nature that others might miss. To betray those codes wasn't just spiritual failure, it was practical disaster. Now imagine the ultimate betrayal, selling out your tribe's spiritual heart, revealing sacred sites, sharing healing knowledge with those who would exploit it, handing over stories that were meant only for the people who lived them. Could there be anything more destructive than losing your very identity, your soul, to betrayal? And yet it happened, sometimes through fear, sometimes through greed, sometimes through the slow erosion of trust. This is where our story sharpens, because the destruction of an entire tribe was not only about weapons, or hunger, or war. It was about betrayal at the deepest level, betrayal of spirit. But before we reveal that final, devastating act, we must see how the people moved with the earth itself, how they adapted to the seasons. Because survival was not static, it was a dance. And when that dance was broken, betrayal became impossible to repair. For centuries, native tribes didn't just live on the land, they moved with it. The seasons were not obstacles. They were partners in the dance of survival. Every change in the wind, every shift in the stars told the people when to move, when to hunt, when to plant, when to rest. On the plains, tribes followed the buffalo herds. In spring, they moved toward calving grounds. In summer, toward wide grasslands where the animals fed. In fall, they prepared for the great winter hunts. By winter, camps were chosen for shelter, with tipis arranged to block the wind. These movements weren't random, they were maps etched into memory, passed down from elders who knew every hill, river, and hidden path. In the forests, tribes adapted to a different rhythm. Spring meant fishing rivers swollen with salmon. Summer meant gathering berries and plants, storing them for leaner months. Autumn was for hunting deer and elk, filling smokehouses with dried meat. Winter was for storytelling, teaching, and ceremonies that bound the people together. The Southwest told another story. Pueblo peoples built permanent stone homes, but they, too, followed seasonal cycles, planting corn, beans, and squash when rains came, storing food for the dry months, and celebrating each turn of the year with ritual dances that honored the forces of nature. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was done without reason. Movement was survival, but it was also respect. To overstay in one place meant depleting it. To move wisely meant keeping balance with the land. But imagine what happens when betrayal enters this cycle. What if a scout, bribed or threatened, reveals the migration patterns of your tribe to enemies? What if a neighboring people, once trusted, betray your winter camp location to outsiders who arrive with muskets and greed? Suddenly, the safe rhythm of seasons becomes a trap, and betrayal could cut even deeper. Trading routes were lifelines connecting tribes across vast distances. Shells from the coast reached the Great Plains. Obsidian from the mountains reached the desert. Copper from the north reached the forests. These networks depended on trust. But one dishonest trader, one broken promise, could collapse entire webs of survival. Think about this. A tribe moving camp trusted others to guard knowledge of their sacred places, their hunting grounds, their secret trails. If that trust was betrayed, enemies could wait along the path. Food stores could be raided. Winter shelters could be burned before they arrived. A betrayal of timing of movement itself was enough to doom everyone. And here lies the terrible truth. Survival demanded unity, but betrayal only required one person. One scout, one warrior, one leader making the wrong choice could throw the cycle into chaos. The elders knew this. That's why stories warned of tricksters, of selfish hunters, of greedy leaders. They weren't just moral lessons, they were survival codes. Because when the seasons turned, the people had to turn with them. One broken step, one betrayal, and the dance collapsed. And so, as we come closer to the heart of our story, we must ask, what betrayal was so great, so final, that it didn't just ruin a season, but erased an entire people from history? That is where we now step into the climax, where the hidden truth of this tribe's destruction is revealed. The story reaches its breaking point here. History remembers a people called the Pawnee Kitkahaki, the Republican Pawnee, for centuries. They thrived along the rivers of what is now Nebraska and Kansas. They followed the buffalo-built earth lodges, honored the spirits, and guarded their traditions. But in the mid-1800s, everything changed, not through open war, but through betrayal. A trusted Pawnee scout, long tied to his people, made a devastating choice. Pressured by outsiders and lured with promises of wealth and protection, he revealed the locations of sacred villages and hunting grounds to U.S. forces. Those maps and whispered secrets turned survival into slaughter. The betrayal shattered the tribe's defenses. Winter camps that should have been hidden were raided. Buffalo hunts that should have fed hundreds ended in ambushes. The delicate cycle of movement, trust, and ritual collapsed. Families starved, villages burned, and slowly, the Kitkahaki vanished, not in a single bloody battle, but in a chain of betrayals that cut deeper than any blade. Think about it. One man's decision, one whisper in the wrong ear, wiped centuries of culture from the land. The tribe's survival code built on unity, trust, and respect was undone by the opposite: selfishness, fear, and betrayal. And here's the most haunting part. For the Pawnee, betrayal wasn't just human, it was spiritual. To betray the people was to betray the ancestors. To betray the land was to betray the Creator. The destruction of the Kitkahaki wasn't just physical, it was a wound in the soul of an entire nation. What do we learn from this? That survival is never about weapons, tools, or even food alone. It's about trust. The Pawnee Kitkahaki fell because that trust was broken. Their story is a warning and a lesson. We, too, live in communities held together by fragile threads of honesty, loyalty, and respect. When those threads snap, whether in politics, families, or friendships, collapse follows. But their story is not only tragedy, it is also wisdom. The pony taught that every choice ripples outward, touching not just ourselves, but our children and the land itself. Betrayal destroys, but honor sustains. In our world of speed and technology, maybe the greatest survival skill isn't fire starting or hunting. Maybe it's remembering what the pony knew, that balance with the earth and loyalty to each other are the only true shields against destruction. So here's the question I leave you with. If betrayal could erase an entire tribe, what could it do to us today? Could your community, your family, even your nation survive? If trust were broken from within? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your voice. And if this story opened your eyes, share it, so more people remember the wisdom of the Pawnee and the lessons hidden in Native American history. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because next time, we'll uncover another forgotten story that might just change how you see the world.